This hits different in 2025.
Come on, this way!
This hits different.
Hello, you delightful individuals, and welcome back to the wonderful world of thirst and vanity, the home of hedonism here on YouTube, where we are going to be divulging into some more Rocky Horror lore today. Some indulgences in the world of Rocky Horror, because as you all know, I am a fan of Rocky Horror. However, this is not the Rocky Horror that we all know and love. This is a different bit that very many people don't know and love. I'm sure many of you will have seen the thumbnail and therefore you know where this is going, but in case you haven't, and more specifically you don't know what Rocky Horror is, perhaps you are new to the realms of it, let's do a quick recap, shall we? To the surprise of absolutely no one, the realms of Rocky Horror Picture Show sculpted a rather large part of my life. My existence was built around the dynamics of Rocky Horror, the hedonism, the gender bending, the different things, fucking with gender and societal norms in so many different ways. And this was written and performed in like 1975. It was an early 70s production that was then made into a mid-70s movie and took the world by storm because it fucked with social norms, it fucked with the idea of gender, it fucked with the idea of social acceptance, of sexual acceptance, of really being yourself in so many different dynamics. And it was revolutionary. It has to be admitted that it didn't start off revolutionary, but we'll get on to that. It was a cult classic. In fact, it is the most popular cult classic that has ever existed. It's been the longest running musical that has ever existed. And there's a reason for that. Because it's amazing. It really hammers in sexual freedom and sexual expression. And for its time, the mid-70s, the mid-1970s, it was so unbelievably forward-thinking that took a lot of people by surprise, and as a result was quite revolutionary, not only in regards to like the way that cinema worked and the way that musicals worked and that dynamic, but in the way that Rocky Horror influenced life and society. Not to mention the fact it was probably one of the first ever shows where it gained such a following that people dressed up in the manner of Rocky Horror to go to the shows. That wasn't really heard of. But that's like the overall sort of like a quick TLDR of like the background of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It is fantastic, revolutionary, mwah, love it, absolutely fantastic, okay? It had a big influence on me. All good in the proverbial hood. However, today, we're not going to be talking about the Rocky Horror Picture Show. We're going to be talking about the sequel. This is a movie that very few people know about called Shock Treatment.
Shock Treatment!
Now, it needs to be said that Shock Treatment is reported to not be a direct sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. However, if I remember correctly, it does contain a lot of the characters from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and also contains a lot of the actors from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Though, if I remember right, the actors didn't play the same parts as they played in Rocky Horror. They played different parts, and then they got different people to play the main parts of the characters that crossed over those genres, you know? Now, the original Rocky Horror Picture Show was made in 1975, and this movie, Shock Treatment, was made in 1981. So it was made 6 years after the Rocky Horror Picture Show's big success in 1975. Now, I watched Shock Treatment an unreasonable amount of years ago. It was when I was in like my mid to late teens, because I had discovered the Rocky Horror Picture Show and became like hyper fixated on it. Absolutely learned everything about it. Watched the movie 8 to 10 times a week. I knew the songs. I knew the plot. My general aesthetic became slightly more feminine, slightly more gender bendy. And of course, my variety of women's underwear that I owned exponentially grew. But I was absolutely obsessed with everything to do with Rocky Horror Picture Show. It was very much the thing that I needed the most. Fun fact, I once made a one-man Rocky Horror Picture Show routine that I aired in like cabarets and stuff like that. It was a 45-minute, one-man Rocky Horror experience where I played all of the characters and sang 80% of the songs. I think I sing all bar like 3 of the songs as myself, and using like various different props and costume to represent each of the different characters, you know? It was an experience, and probably one of the most challenging shows that I think I've ever done. Ever. Back to it. It was through this hyperfixation of the Rocky Horror Picture Show that I discovered shock treatment. Now, I should have known, based on the fact that nobody really seemed to know what shock treatment was, apart from the bosses of the fancy dress shop that I worked in at the time. No one really seemed to know what it was about, and therefore I really should have known that it wasn't going to live up to the Rocky Horror standards. It wasn't going to live up to what my expectations were of like having been set by Rocky Horror. But regardless of this, I dove in headfirst, expecting it to be the same level of, like, probably different, but the same level of sexual revolution that Rocky Horror Picture Show was. And honestly, here I am, many decades later, and I can't remember anything about the show itself. I can't remember anything about the movie, but I do remember like a younger ValenVain thinking, the fuck was that? Like, the underwhelm was so severe, just purely on how I could have loved the Rocky Horror Picture Show so much, and shock treatment could be so just meh. But I am an older man now. I am wiser. I have a greater appreciation for the subtleties, the nuances and context of things. My experience of having seen more stage shows, more live theatre, more street theatre, more performances in general, and of course more cinema, and having a deep appreciation for historic cinema as well, like old black and white movies and stuff like that, and their place within history. And with all that considered, I thought that now was possibly the time that I should give it another go. So that's what I'm going to do, and I will let you know how that goes. I'm a little apprehensive, to say the least.
Okay, different camera angle. Why? Because I'm feeling artsy. But now it's time to watch shock treatment.
Once upon a time.
Isn't this... This is just a time warp. This is just a time warp. It's just a jump to the left. And then a step to the right. Put your hands on your hips. And bend your knees in tight. And it's a pelvic thrust that really drives you insane. Let's do the time.
It's all right, Brad. Everything's gonna be all right.
See what they did there? I'm 11 minutes in. It's an hour and a half long. There's already a dynamic of like over capitalization. Everything's a little bit sleazy. Everything's very, very fake. It's very like unreal in the fact that it's like too capitalist. Like, everything's just very... It's kind of like this was the beginning of the 80s, and then the 80s proceeded to be more and more like this with how fake everything was and over the top everything was. They do have Brad and Janet in it as a married couple, and they've got like Betty and Ralph Hapshat, but they've had a divorce. So they do have elements from the Rocky Horror Picture Show that they are continuing on into this entire endeavor, but it's, I don't know, maybe like an alternate dimension, an alternate reality version of Denton, but it's feeling icky. Like there's a sexual tension underneath it all, but it's a sexual tension that's very icky, like less erotically charged and more sleazy and dirty. I don't remember anything from the movie, but this is making me feel the ick. And I don't remember feeling the ick. Is that Rick Mail? It is. It's like part capitalism, part medical show, part reality TV show, with an undercurrent of corporate takeover and medical experimentation. It's interesting, they've touched on the prejudice against mental health, and they've touched on homophobia as well, and racism. National racism. This is wild. There's like a whole dynamic here, like the whole building a cult following that's like so similar to certain political followers. What am I watching? What is this?
Huh. That was an experience. Alright, so, that was It was nowhere near as good as Rocky Horror. First and foremost, it was nowhere near as good as Rocky Horror by any stretch of the imagination. But having now seen it, 29 years on from when it aired, it was super ahead of its time. And I mean that in the worst way possible. Watching that movie from the perspective of 2025, when we're all in late stage capitalism, cultist politics, the oversaturation of corruption and power corrupts and money corruption and people manufacturing news and how to throw perspectives onto an audience and how the public change their opinions based on how news is presented to them, it hits so different. It hits so different. Yeah, I'm quite taken aback by it. And I can understand how, like, when I was like younger and watched it then, how that would have been like, yeah, it's all right. Like, some of the songs are okay. The whole thing's it's decidedly average. But now, looking back on it as an adult, nearly 30 years after it aired, and knowing what's happening in the world at the moment in regards to politics and societal change and societal standards and expectations and the world of content creation and how reality TV works and how everything's so scripted and fake and you want genuine, but can you be sure it is genuine? It hits very, very different. Before I get into it, I want to do a little bit of research into the movie itself. I kind of like to go into these things without any kind of background knowledge, go in as cluelessly as possible so that I can have like my full genuine reaction to it, then go away and research it and find out what's going on to get kind of a little bit of perspective going on. Okay, so this movie had over double the budget of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Rocky Horror Picture Show had a budget of 1.4 million and Shock Treatment had a budget of 3.5 million. That is wild. It was reported to be a commercial and financial failure, a big old flop. It has to be said that Rocky Horror Picture Show, when that first aired in the midnight showings, that was also a flop. It was only later in its process that it started getting that sort of cult following and people started really buying into the idea of Rocky Horror. However, it doesn't seem that that was the case for this one. They did the midnight showing like they did for Rocky Horror. It flopped like they did for Rocky Horror, but Rocky Horror got that sort of cult following, whereas this one just kept staying out. And it really says a lot when I saw like actors that I knew in this one. Obviously, there's all the actors from Rocky Horror Picture Show that they reused in this one, but people like Rick Mayall. Rick Mayall was in there. I know Rick Mayall from British comedy from way, way back in the day, and he was in this, apparently. You would think if somebody quite as popular as Rick Mayall had been in it, there would be a bit more hype around it. But then I suppose Richard O'Brien, the whole Rocky Horror crew, yeah, interesting. Richard O'Brien actually said the infamous tagline, supposedly, it's not a sequel, it's not a prequel, it's an equal. It was not an equal in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it literally featured Brad and Janet after they'd got married, and Ralph and Betty Hapshat. Like, it featured specific characters from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and they put it in Denton, which is where they all lived. Therefore, following on from Rocky Horror Picture Show, which literally makes it a sequel. Unless this could have been like an alternate reality, maybe? An alternate reality Denton, perhaps? Richard O'Brien is said to have later recanted that statement, frequently criticizing the film by going so far as to refer to it as an abortion. Wow. That's quite the statement. So Richard O'Brien isn't happy about it by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, wow, okay. I did hear that after the success of Rocky Horror Picture Show, there was a lot of pressure on Richard O'Brien to make a sequel, make another Rocky Horror Picture Show, but evidently this was not it. Oh, okay. According to this article that I'm reading here from sci-fi.com, the actual movie production was sort of full of bad luck from the beginning. As they say, the movie was plagued with problems. Susan Sarandon and Barry Bostwick were unavailable to reprise their roles as Brad and Janet, so they were replaced with Jessica Harper and Clifton Young. There was various parts cut from the script, apparently, because certain characters from Rocky Horror Picture Show weren't available, or certain actors weren't available, so they just cut entire sections of it. And then in 1980, when they were actually filming it, because it was released in 1981, the Screen Actors Guild had a strike, which meant that the cast and crew could only be available for tiny periods of time, and they weren't able to shoot outside. They had to do everything inside, which led to this whole idea of putting it inside a TV studio itself. Okay, so it says here that the intention was to release it as a normal movie, but then they decided to change that and release it in the same way that they had with Rocky Horror in regards to the midnight showing and stuff, which didn't work 6 years on from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Oh god, a lot of fans consider it to be a pale imitation of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And honestly, I get that. I get that entirely. I can understand why they think it is a pale imitation of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. First of all, because it's got repeating cast. A whole load of people from the original Rocky Horror Picture Show cast come back for this movie in different roles. Then, of course, they've still got the characters, Brad and Janet, Betty and Ralph. They've got, it's all in Denton. There's so many themes in there that link it to the Rocky Horror Picture Show that people are never going to be able to view this as a movie in its own right. They are always going to compare it to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which very much works against it in the same way that the new Crow movie works against itself by calling the main characters Eric and Shelley. In fact, do you know what? That's not a bad call. I feel like this would have been much better if they hadn't used the same characters. If they'd have literally had completely different characters, nothing related to the Rocky Horror Picture Show at all, and just done it in its own right, then it probably would have been better, because nobody would have compared it to the original Rocky Horror Picture Show as sort of like a prequel, sequel dynamic, you know? And of course, you can really see the way that Rocky Horror like slides into this, not only with the characters and stuff like that, as I've already mentioned, but also with like the pacing and some of the direction decisions, and of course the music. There's a lot of the music where it's following the same feelings, the same vibes. There was a couple of songs within the actual production itself where I started singing the Time Warp over the top of it, because it was the same sort of chord progression, the same pacing, the same tempo. It was just all very similar. Like, I'm not sure whether I would have noticed it if I didn't know its relation to Rocky Horror already, but because I knew it was something to do with Rocky Horror, I was like, okay, this is definitely the Time Warp. Okay, yeah, no, I can see the vibes of Hot Patootie in here, you know, like I can feel what's going on with this, you know? There's also a dynamic with the casting choices they made with Brad and Janet, because as the original Brad and Janet weren't available, they recast them. This was a particularly interesting choice because the new cast for Brad and Janet didn't have the same vocal range as the old cast. It's not a problem to recast people by any stretch of imagination. Having seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show live, God knows how many times, I've seen so many different actors and performers perform the different roles of Rocky Horror Picture Show. But within the movie as a sequel, having this Brad and Janet character with different vocal ranges and therefore singing completely differently to the way the original Brad and Janet did, there was a disassociation there where I was like, okay, it is Brad and Janet from the original, but it's not. Is it? I don't know. It kind of lent itself a lot more to that vibe of alternate universe type thing, you know? Okay, apparently there is a promotional TV feature called the Rocky Horror Treatment that was sort of like a promotional thing that was aired in anticipation of Shock Treatment coming out in 1981. I have never seen that. I didn't even realize that there was a thing. That's something that evidently escaped my hyperfixation when I was a plucky young whippersnapper. So I am naturally gonna go and find that and look into it, see what kind of this. It's like a TV feature documentary thing about the Rocky Horror hype or something like that. If you would like me to make a video on that, then please let me know. I'm gonna go find it and watch it anyway, but it's up to you as to whether I actually make a video on it. Oh, okay. It also says that there was an alternate sequel draft script available that is supposed to be available on some fan websites called Revenge of the Old Queen. Richard O'Brien had began making the script prior to all of this, or alongside all of this, but that has never actually come to pass. Interesting. That is a fascinating bit of information, and again, something I would be interested to go and have a read of to see where they were going to go with it. Okay, though, on to my thoughts. Overall, it's all right. It's not great. I wouldn't go so far as to say I'd ever watch it again, you know. Some of the music's okay, like it's got a bit more of a snap to it that I quite enjoyed. Now that I've got a bit of understanding of like the constraints they had on like filming and stuff like that, they had to do it all within this TV studio type dynamic. Thought it was an interesting way of like the angle of indulgence and hedonism and stuff. Like with Rocky Horror Picture Show, you've got this element of rebellion. They're fighting against the social norms. Social norms say that people should be like this, X, Y, and Z. And Rocky Horror really fought against those, standing out, saying fuck you to social norms and stuff. Whereas this really, I don't know, lent into it a little bit. It talked about the kind of opposite end of the spectrum where people go against social norms, but purely because of power and money and indulgence. As I said during the recording, it all felt very sleazy. Like they were treating people like objects. There was a lot of objectification. There was a lot of sleaze, a lot of selfishness, a lot of self-indulgence that really came across like predatory. To be fair, there was a lot of predatory nature in there and manipulation as to manipulating people with drugs or with atmosphere or pressure, just social pressures and stuff like that, that kind of really lent into this whole dynamic of like manipulative power that honestly hit home for me with the way that the world is at the moment. The dynamic that you can have people that are super corrupt, super manipulative, and that can be really pointed out to people and be like, hey, look, here's all the evidence to prove that this person's corrupt and manipulative and they're lying and all of this stuff is happening, and the audience just don't care. They don't care. There's a really interesting bit of symbolism towards the end. Here's a spoiler for you. There's a really bit of interesting symbolism towards the end where all of the audience are locked up. They're all in stripy convict outfits behind bars, and yet they're all singing the same songs that worship this character, Farley Flavors, despite the fact that he's the one that's put them in the prison. And I was like, wow, that is very symbolic. Especially with what's going on at the moment in current world politics. Yeah, there was those elements with it. Then there was the elements with like the reality TV dynamic where people are filming every single thing that every single person's ever done. And this was released in 1981, so this was before all of Britain's Got Talent stuff. It was before all the Big Brother stuff. It was before reality TV as we know it, and before content creation as we know it, where people do now live stream their entire lives and stuff like that. It's wild to see how this hits from the perspective of 2025. I was expecting a meh, all right, okay, you know, it's an all right kind of thing, fair enough. And also the way that they paint mental health and using the fads of what people should be into to manipulate people for their own gains. Yeah, very, very intriguing. I think I'm going to be thinking about this one for quite a while, because I definitely went into it expecting decidedly average, all right, see how it goes, and I have come out of it being like, wow. From the perspective of a content creator in 2025, with what is going on in the world and the current political climate and all that jazz, this hits a little bit different. It's a lot deeper. So when I say it was ahead of its time, I really mean like 29 years ahead of its time, and in the most bizarre way. Anyway, friends, thank you very much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. Of course, as always, if you would like to check me out on any of my other socials, you can do. This is where I live stream my life. Well, bits of it anyway, on twitch.tv/ValenVain. If you want to check me out on TikTok, you can do. I've got plans for that, but they're currently not all available. But you can check me out, check all my old stuff out on there if you would like. And of course, on Instagram, where I put more and more bits of like my life doing performance bits and pieces and what have you. All of the shenanigans going on there. Behold the intriguing dynamics of social media content creation life. This is my shock treatment. Do you know what I mean? And do you know what? Some of it can be quite shocking. Thank you very much for watching though, friends. I really, really appreciate it. If you would like to see me do a video on the Rocky Horror Treatment thing, whatever that is, the promotional TV thing, let me know. And of course, on the alternate sequel draft script that Richard O'Brien wrote as a sequel to Rocky Horror Picture Show, Revenge of the Old Queen. Certainly has more ring to it than shock treatment does. And as always, friends, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Because if I wouldn't do it, I'll fucking kill you.